Chapter 2, New Empires in the Americas. Section 4, The Race for Empires. Several events were happening in Europe in the 1500s. One of the main things that were happening were disagreements about religion, and that just kind of threw Europe into a bunch of craziness. The disagreements happened between Catholics. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther will begin something called the Protestant Reformation. Now, he didn't come out to start a Protestant Reformation. He just wanted to see some things change within the Catholic Church. And those criticisms led to a split in the Catholic Church. And you have the Catholics and you have the Protestants. Protestants, if you look at the word Protestant, the first part of the word is protest. So these people are protesting some of the practices that were happening in the Catholic Church. Anyway, countries in Europe started to affiliate with one side or the other, whether they're a Catholic country or if they're a Protestant country. And so often those disagreements would lead to war. The invention of the printing press also led to some of this division between Catholics and Protestants, because now people can read the Bibles for themselves instead of relying on church teachings, again, leading to a split. King Henry VIII is going to defy the Pope in 1534. He wanted to divorce his wife, Anne, because she didn't produce a male heir. And so he wanted a divorce, and the Pope, of course, wouldn't let him have one. So he decides to found his own church called the Church of England. Another name for it is called the Anglican Church in 1534, so he could divorce his wife. Okay, so in Spain in the late 1500s, the king, King Philip II, was using his great wealth to start a Catholic Reformation against the Protestant movement. And he wanted to drive the Protestants out of England. So he will send his large, massive fleet of ships called the Spanish Armada to England to overthrow Queen Elizabeth I and the Anglican Church. He was also mad at the fact that Queen Elizabeth was also sending her own ships out and raiding Spanish treasure ships. One of the more successful English pirates of that time period was Sir Francis Drake. Anyway, Philip II is not happy about this, and so he will send his Spanish Armada to England. Now, along the way, a huge storm hits and sinks some of the Spanish ships. And then by the time the actual Armada gets to England, the English ships, this much smaller English navy, was waiting for them and were able to defeat the much larger Spanish Armada. This was a huge defeat for Spain. Spain was weakened by economic problems like inflation. Inflation is a rise in the price of goods caused by an increase in the amount of money in use. Now, this increase in the amount of money is due to all the gold and silver that was being discovered in the New World, and now they're circulating into their economy. That actually hurt the Spanish economy. So prices are going up, and because of more and more money being put into the economy. And because of their financial problems, other countries will start to take advantage of Spain's weaknesses. England, France, and Netherlands will start to challenge Spain's power in the Americas. If you look at this little diagram here, it kind of explains a little bit about the whole inflation thing. You have a little bit of inflation right here, and your economy is really strong. But the more inflation starts to come up, the more your economy starts to dwindle. And so inflation is huge over here, and you got the skinny yellow guy, which represents the economy being pretty weak. Now, we've been talking about countries looking for a new route to get to Asia. And we focus mainly about going around Africa or even heading west across the Atlantic Ocean. Instead, there was a huge continent there that blocked their way. But there'll still be groups of people out there in countries who are trying to find a passageway to get to Asia. But this time they're going to be looking to the north to find this passageway. This fabled passageway became known as the Northwest Passage. The first to really try to find this Northwest Passage was an Italian sailor known as John Cavato. Now, in English, his name was John Cabot, and the reason why we call him John Cabot is he's actually sailing for England. But anyway, John Cabot is searching for a passage to the Pacific Ocean along the coast of Canada and Newfoundland. And as you can see in the map here, Cabot leaves England, sails over to North America, looking all over for this Northwest Passage, never was able to find one. But because of his explorations in all these different areas, that kind of became the basis of England's claim to North America. Because even though he never found the Northwest Passage, he is actually finding land for England and claiming it for England. France will send their own guys over to North America looking for this Northwest Passage. One guy was Giovanni de Verrazzano. That was in 1524. He went looking for a Northwest Passage. He searched up and down the coast of North America. Couldn't find one. Another Frenchman named Jacques Cartier, who you see in the picture here. He will lead France's next major expedition in North America. And he will explore much of what we know of Canada. And he will actually make it, if you follow this red line here, he'll actually make it down a major river way up here in the north, the St. Lawrence River, and sail all the way down to what we now know as Montreal, Canada. Still unable to find a Northwest Passage. However, he and Verrazzano will be claiming land for France. The Dutch will also have their hands in the exploration of a Northwest Passage. They will hire an English captain named Henry Hudson, who will look all the same areas all over where we know of Canada to look for this Northwest Passage. So he explores all into these bodies of water, into this large body of water called Hudson Bay. He'll actually make it down to what we now know as present-day New York. You hear of the Hudson River, named after Henry Hudson. He does make an expedition into this area that they now call Hudson Bay, but his sailors on board, the crew on board his ship, mutinied. That means they're angry and they overthrow the captain. And they put the captain and some other people on a raft and set them out to sail on the Hudson Bay, and they leave on the major ship. And Henry Hudson was no longer heard of. This was in 1611. England will start its attempts at developing a settlement in North America. And they're going to start a colony in the late 1500s, started by a man named Sir Walter Raleigh, who you see in the picture here. He received something called a charter. A charter is a document giving him permission to start a colony. He sent an expedition over to North America, and which lands in what we now know of kind of the Virginia, North Carolina area. And he is the one, Raleigh, who will name it Virginia. So like I said, Walter Raleigh sends this expedition that lands in what we now know of North Carolina and Virginia, and this group will begin or establish a colony called Roanoke. And the colonists there found life really difficult. They fought with Native Americans, they had a hard time finding food and growing food. So after a year, a lot of the colonists went home, back to England. Soon after that, in 1587, a guy named John White will return and resettle in the colony of Roanoke. And, it was a little bit more successful. John White had to go back to England in order to get some more supplies. But while he was in England, a war breaks out between England and Spain, and he's stuck there. And he's stuck there for about 3 years. When White finally is able to leave England and come back to Roanoke, he discovers that this colony disappeared. No one was left. The only clue that he had of the fate of the colonists rested on a tree with this name on it. I'll write it over here. Croatoan. That's all he ever found that was left of the colonists that were living on Roanoke. So what happened to these people? It's kind of mysterious. No one really knows 100% sure. I think more evidence today leads to the fact that Native Americans probably either killed them all or they were captured and taken back to where the tribe lived on the mainland, because you can see Roanoke as an island. There's lots of far-fetched stories about what happened to the colonists. One far-fetched one, which is is really far-fetched, is that aliens came down and took them away. I'll leave that up to you. So the English weren't really successful with their first colony at Roanoke. The French were slightly more successful. They were exploring mainly their area. They weren't really setting up settlements, if you will. The French who came over to explore the area were mainly fur traders, explorers, and missionaries, and they just kind of populated this whole area. If you look at this map right here, you kind of get an idea of where the French kind of traded, mostly up in this kind of where up in Canada and along what we now call the Mississippi River in the Great Lakes area. That's kind of where the French were exploring. Anyway, a couple of Frenchmen of note. One, Rene Robert de La Salle, will claim lands all up and down the Mississippi River. So that red line is the Mississippi River. And all the time he is claiming land for France. French settlers had a really close and good relationship with the Native Americans. I think mainly because of the fact that the French weren't really taking their land, they were just trading with them. So they had a really good relationship with Native Americans. The Dutch will come over to America exploring and establishing a settlement at a place we call New Netherland. New Netherland was located between the Delaware and Hudson rivers, kind of where we know of New York today. And one of the main reasons for the Dutch coming to America was to trade with the locals, meaning the Native Americans. In fact, the leading Dutch person in America at the time was a guy named Peter Minuit. He actually negotiated a deal which the Dutch bought an island called Manhattan from the local Native Americans in return for some other goods that they didn't have, and they will call it New Amsterdam. So the colony itself is New Netherlands, but like the city, the capital, if you will, of this colony, of this Dutch colony, was New Amsterdam. Now, when you see these places like New Netherland or New Amsterdam, it just means that there was another one somewhere else. So obviously there's a country called the Netherlands, and their capital is Amsterdam. When they find this colony over in America, it's New Netherlands and New Amsterdam. We'll talk about New France. You've heard of New England and New Spain. So they're just adding new to it just to indicate that there's something else over in Europe with the same name. The last colony we'll talk about in the Americas is New Sweden. Yes, even Sweden got in on the action. They'll find a colony kind of close to where New Netherlands is. If you look at this map here, it's the purple area. That became known as New Christina. It was the first Swedish settlement, and it was founded along the Delaware River, which is this river right here, in 1638. Eventually, the Dutch will conquer New Sweden. That was in 1655. So it's kind of a short-lived colony for Sweden, but they did attempt a colony in America. That is the end of Section 4.